So I'm actually very excited to introduce Carel tonight. I was asked to do so, and Carel and I met because he came here for a Twin Peaks event, and we fell to talking, and we both have a history that goes back to Holland. And both of our parents lived in Curacao for a period of time. Most of you know him as his work as a performer. He's worked with David Lynch, Barry Sonnenfeld. He's just wrapped the Shining prequel, directed by Mike Flanagan, the guy who rebooted The Haunting of Hill House. But that's really only part of the story. Many people don't know he's also an artist. As Greg mentioned, we have this show up called The Unified Field, and one of the installation pieces is by Carel. He was an early adopter of spherical panoramic photography, part of the early LA punk scene. And he's lived on 2 islands that I know of, and is a genuinely curious man. If you hang out with Carel, you have a cup of coffee or go for a hike, the kinds of things you'll talk about will be everything from astronomy, physics, interactive design, information theory, and how Spinoza accidentally killed himself by polishing mirrors to support his day job as a philosopher. So a very interested man and a very knowledgeable man. So I'm looking forward to what he brings to tonight's lecture on Edward Curtis. I've seen some of the images, which are astonishing. Even if you are familiar with Curtis's work, I was being refreshed to see them anew is really remarkable. So please welcome Carel Struycken.
Good evening, everybody. I first became aware of Edward Curtis through a gigantic book that my wife got from her residence as a present, and it had all these large photos in it, and they were all Edward Curtis photos. And one thing that I noticed was that a lot of them were really dark. And being a photographer myself, I thought, is this the way he wanted it, or is this just a bad print? So I became more and more interested through that very superficial quest to find out if there were better prints. And then I finally stumbled upon a biography of his, and I realized that this was just an amazing person, and what he had accomplished over 30 years practically on his own, without any institutional backing, is, as far as I know, the largest anthropological documentation ever undertaken. And he did it all by himself with the help of 2 or 3 people. So the first picture I saw of his, let's see if this works. Yeah, it works. Okay. Is the one that many of you probably already have seen, is the Vanishing Race. And what I learned is that he really meant it to be that way. And there are many of his photos that we will see where you see people from the back, where they're kind of leaving, disappearing the stage, so to speak. This was really what was going on in the late 1800s. The American population, the Native American population had been reduced to about 230,000 people. Most of the East Coast tribes had completely disappeared. There was no more tribal life on the East Coast, east of the Mississippi. And this is the world in which Edward Curtis is born. He was born in 1868 in Wisconsin, and his father was a semi-invalid who spent a lot of time bedridden. So at a very early age, at around 12 years, he had to kind of more or less provide for the family, for his siblings and for his parents. So at an early age, he learns how to hunt and do odd jobs for people in the neighborhood and make some money that way, and also put food on the table. When he's 12, he finds a lens that his father has. I think it's a lens from the Civil War or so. No camera, just a lens. And Edward Curtis finds a how-to book, Wilson's Photographics, and builds his own camera. So that's his very first camera. Then around age 18, 19, they're still living in Wisconsin, and there's an early or a late frost. Anyhow, the crop dies and the family threatens to die of hunger, and his father and Edward decide to go west, and they end up in Seattle, where they stake a claim on the Olympic Peninsula, looking out on Seattle, build a log cabin, and then get the rest of the family over there. That's in this day and age, that's such a fantastic thing to read about. I mean, we can hardly find a place to have a roof over our head, and in those days, even if you hardly had any money, you could still kind of build your own log cabin and do a little bit of fishing and trapping animals, and you were at least not going hungry. The father dies soon after the family has arrived, and now Edward is really the only one to take care of his mother and siblings. So he starts clam digging, salmon fishing, picking and selling berries, working as handyman in the neighborhoods. And of course, all that stuff was a little bit easier than it would be now, because there was so much salmon, you practically just had to put your hand in a river and you would catch a salmon. And by age 22, he has a serious accident. He mangles his spine, and he's laid up for a year. And while he's lying there, he realizes that he'll never be able to do physical labor anymore. And somebody happens to come by the cabin with a gigantic camera, 14 by 17 inch plate camera, that he wants to sell because he wants to get some money to buy piece of land. So Edward buys this gigantic camera to great displeasure of the family because they have hardly anything to eat. And he decides to invest the rest of the little money that they have to become partner in a photographic shop in Seattle. So for $150, he gets his name on in the window, and very soon he starts his own business. And this is still just amazing to me. Within 4 years, from being bedridden, not being able to move, he is the most celebrated photographer on the West Coast, and has a bustling portrait photography business. People come from all over, from Vancouver, from Oregon, to have a photo taken by him. And he's doing well enough that he can buy himself a big house in Seattle, move the whole family in, plus his assistants who work in the Photoshop. And he soon gets bored and starts to venture outside more and more. And that's when he finds Princess Angeline. She is the last surviving daughter of Chief Seattle, and she lives in a hovel on the beach and digs clams and collects mussels that she sells in this growing city of Seattle. And this is the first photo that he takes of her. She kind of, she's a pretty ornery person, and she doesn't really like photos to have taken of her, but he pays her well, so she starts to freely pose for him, and he has a number. I just have one more where she's gathering mussels, and I'm not even sure if this is her, but there are a few photos just like this that are of Angeline. And Angeline kind of gets him interested in Native Americans, and he probably realizes that where he's living used to be tribal lands not that long ago, and he starts to travel around the Puget Sound and shoot some more photos of the remnants of the tribes that officially by treaty had to leave, but a few of them have just stayed behind. And here's one such photo. This he didn't shy away from having people pose for a photo and to kind of arrange everything so that it would be a nice composition. And in this day and age, there are some anthropologists who think less of him because he did that. And to me, it's just a logical outcome of who he is and what he wants to present to the world. He thinks of him self as an artist, and so yeah, obviously he's going to compose a nice picture. By this time, he is pretty much over his injury, and he starts hiking. He goes up Mount Rainier a few times and actually becomes very well acquainted with the volcano, and starts taking pictures, although I have not found any of his pictures that he took there. And on one of his trips, he comes across two gentlemen who got lost in the fog, and they happen to be Grenelle, who was the founder of the Ottoman Society, and what's his name? Let's see. And Miriam. Miriam is the founder of or co-founder of the Geographic Society. So really, he couldn't have met two more appropriate people to be lost on that mountain. And Grenelle and Curtis become fast friends, and Grenelle invites Curtis to join an expedition to Alaska, and Curtis will be the expedition photographer. This trip was arranged by an East Coast millionaire, and they go on the trip. Again, I haven't found any photos of that particular trip. I know that Curtis wasn't very happy about how the trip was organized. People would come to an Eskimo village, and because the Inuit usually had a number of villages, and they would move from one to another depending on the season. So one was for hunting seals, one was for picking berries, and so on. So this village happened to be empty, and people from the expedition start taking off with objects that they find there, and that is something that even this early on, with very little experience, Curtis realizes that's not a nice thing to do. After they come back, Grenelle immediately invites Curtis to a trip to the Plains Indians, to the pagan, the Blackfeet pagan tribe in Montana. And Curtis and Grenelle has lived with the Indians for many, many years, a few months a year, probably in the summer, because otherwise it's pretty cold there. And this is when Curtis really, for the first time, realized what this is all about. This was a small, historically spoken, a small encampment, just a mile across. But in the past, this would have been 10 times as large. A gathering of teepees. This was for the Sundance. And with Grenelle's introduction, he has a chance to really get around and take photos. And one of them is actually a pretty beautiful one. and it's called Pagan Dandy. He was a bit of a dandy himself, so it's kind of... and after this trip, he immediately takes off on his own to the Hopi reservation, or to the Hopi, to a Hopi village. And his reasoning is that because they live in such an inhospitable environment, that maybe the Europeans will have left them alone. So when he arrives there, that turns out not to be completely true, because at the same time that he arrives there, there's the Harvard Glee Club visiting, and they are there to witness the snake dance. The snake dance is to assure the tribe of rain, which they need because they are agriculturalists. And here's a photo of the snake dance. And Curtis becomes completely enchanted with this, and he wants to become part of it somehow. And so he approaches the chief of the snake priest and asks him if he can somehow be initiated, or at least be a witness to the whole ritual of collecting snakes and caring for them and so on. And the snake priest tells him that that's not really possible, but that he should come back and learn more about him, and who knows what they can do for him. He travels a little bit more in the area, goes back, and then in 1903, he meets Chief Joseph of the Nez Perce, or it should be Nez Perce, because it's the French, the pierced noses, right? But I think they call themselves now the Nez Perce or something. I should take a step back and talk a little bit about the Native American population. Before Hernando de Soto first ventured up the Mississippi Valley, they are now assuming that there were between 10 and 20 million Native Americans living in the U.S. Compare that to a total population of the United States in 1870 of 40 million, and you realize that was a decent amount of people, and they had large settlements, especially in the Mississippi area, and they had a culture. The same goes for South America. The Amazon has long been assumed to have been a pristine wilderness, but now they are really discovering that that there was a much bigger population living in the Amazon before we came there and spread our European diseases to which they had no resistance. This is a map of the Amazon, and all the little squares you see are places where they have found, in Brazilian it's called terra preta, black earth. And what they found is that black earth is a man-made substance, Sometimes it goes up to 7-8 feet down, so it's a pretty considerable layer of man-made material, and it's very fertile. It stays that way because usually in the Amazon everything washes away, but not in those areas. And there are also Francisco de Orellana was the first. He came with Pizarro to Peru, and then I think Pizarro wanted to get rid of his brother, and so anyhow he told him to go on an expedition down the Amazon, and down they went, and in the chronicles that were written by one of the priests that came along, they complain about constantly being under attack. So there was not one area that they traveled through the river where there was not a settlement. It was one settlement after the other. And 100 years later, it was all gone. So most of the tribes that are now encountered in the Amazon, of what's left of it, and certainly with this new president that may not last that long, I mean the new president in Brazil, it's kind of the same as here, really. They have much in common. Because the current Brazilian president just wants to forget about all the natives who live there and just open it all up for big agricultural business, to which the soil is really not suited. It will all wash away and become a desert. But anyhow, that's what they want to do. Chief Joseph comes to Seattle because he is the kind of the representative of one of the tribes, the Nez Perce, whatever, who by treaty they were going to get the Wallowa Valley, which is in the state of Washington. And as soon as the ink was dry, they were kicked out of the valley. And he is traveling around the states. He comes to Seattle to, of all things, a football match, hoping that it's a chance to address the masses and tell them that they want their land back. And Curtis convinces him to come to his studio and take this wonderful portrait. Then he goes on to this is, let's see, now I'm in 1904, Curtis realizes that he'll never be able to do what he has set out to do, to document all the tribes that still have their own traditions. He needs more money. So right at that time, he gets invited by Theodore Roosevelt because he's now famous nationwide. So Theodore Roosevelt wants him to come over and take photos of his kids. And while he's there, he tries to get some funding. Nobody takes him serious because he doesn't have an academic background. He tries to get money from the Smithsonian. he just doesn't get any funding from anybody until he meets J.P. Morgan in 1906, and he finally convinces J.P. Morgan that he will get his expeditions financed. He will get $75,000 over a period of 5 years. But this should only pay for the cost of the expedition, and all the monies that Curtis hopes to make of it are to come from the books that he's going to publish. And he has great plans. It's going to be a set of 20 volumes, and he has to try to find people who will fork over $3,000 in $1,900, so that would be $80,000 now, for this set of books. That's not going very well, but that's not keeping Curtis back from going on the road again. And this time he goes to the Apache, and here we have another beautiful portrait of an Apache warrior, and another Apache, another one. And he also tries to figure out, because the Apaches, or most Native American tribes, one of the things that they are kind of that people are dismissive about is that they say, well, they don't have a real religion, so they're not real people. And Curtis tries to prove that, for instance, the Apache, that their whole life is a religion. Everything from the moment they wake up, the moment that they greet the sun, everything is a ceremonial gesture. And so he wants to make that part of his documentation as proof that these are very spiritual people. But it's all secret, and they don't allow him to see anything. On his second trip, when he has some more money, he tries to bribe people, and finally, after a lot of trouble, he finally bribes one of the medicine men to show him some of the secret objects. And he even takes photos of that. I have one object here, I think. Yeah. This is it. And even now, there's a wonderful documentary that was made about Edward Curtis and how the tribes view him now. And when the documentarian showed this to one of the Apaches, they said, "You have to get rid of that picture. Nobody's allowed to see that." And she said, "Well, this picture was taken 100 years ago, so." But it's still taken very seriously. That's not for our eyes. While Curtis is visiting Roosevelt, he also meets Geronimo for the first time and takes kind of a stately picture, not a typical Curtis picture, but it's like Geronimo in full regalia. Here's much more of a Curtis portrait of Geronimo. And he really, in all his portraits, he manages to capture so much of the personality and of that particular moment in these people's lives. Now, another thing that really made Curtis realize how urgent all of this was that when he came back to the Hopis a number of times, and each time he would come back, they looked less and less like Hopi because the men were being forced to cut their hair short, otherwise they would get a fine. A lot of the kids were hauled off to boarding schools. And this whole idea of boarding schools and assimilating the Native Americans into our wonderful European culture had already started in the 30s, but it's kind of went full blast in the area that he was traveling around. And here are some pictures. This is of the kid before he entered the boarding school, and that's after he had entered the boarding school. And here are some more. So this was pretty drastic. They were not allowed to speak their language, and many of them, when they came back, they were completely alienated from their own people. Now, this is still, and this went on until the 80s. My wife worked on the Navajo reservation as a doctor in the 80s, and she would still get kids from boarding schools who were brought into the clinic to be checked out. But there is some ambivalence in how they view this, because the reality is that if you're a smart kid and you manage to get educated on the reservation, it's really hard to leave, because your peers will see it as a betrayal. So in a way, it did serve a purpose to at least get some members of the tribe acquainted with the wider world, and therefore also be able to protect their own people better. Here's a map of all the places that Curtis went to, and it's basically everything west of the Mississippi. It's just staggering what he managed to do in 30 years with hardly any money, and he never managed to sell many of his subscriptions for the 20 volumes. So he wasn't making any money on this. His Photoshop was still going strong. His wife was kind of running the business, and his eldest daughter was taking care of the photography part. And then he had a few really good assistants who also were instrumental in a lot of the post-processing work of Curtis's photos. He traveled with one gigantic 14 by 17 camera that he got when he was when he was laid up. And then he had a more regular sized camera for those days, 6.5 by 8.5, which is called a full plate. You had half plates, full plates, and then you had bigger formats. And most of and everything was contact prints. So when you see a Curtis print in the books that came out, they're all the size of the original negative. Um, Here's another kind of artistic one. He was in Seattle. He was known. There was something like called Curtis Nudes, tasteful nudes. But I have come across very few of them, just 2 or 3. That's it. So they are locked up in some boudoir somewhere. Then now back to the timeline. Yeah. He comes to a point where he realizes that even J.P. Morgan's money is not going to last him long enough to fulfill his mission. And he gets the grand idea to do a multimedia show. So early 1900s version of a multimedia show. He shows hand-colored lantern slides. Here's one of them. Yeah, there it is. These aren't very good photos. The only chance I had to take photos of this was with my phone while I was visiting the Rainier Club to look at Curtis's prints. I'll show you some more of the slides because they're pretty spectacular. So these are war canoes from the northwest coast near Vancouver Island and so. And this is a typical tribal scene. Somebody gathering mussels, an elder. This is, I think this is a Hopi or a Pueblo dance ceremony. This is some teepees in the wilderness. This is from one of the Pueblo Indians. And here's one. When you see this in black and white, you can really see more on this one. So in that regard, when I saw these lantern slides, I felt kind of vindicated that the prints were not as good as they could have been, because here's proof that there was more information in the negative than we see on the prints. He travels around all of the U.S. Everywhere it's sold-out crowds. This is with an orchestra, by the way, with music that's specifically composed for the event. He has also been recording songs of all the tribes. So at the end of his 30 years, he ends up with 10,000 wax rolls, Edison rolls, of recordings, and between 45 and 50,000 images. So it was literally a multimedia show. How they did that, I have no idea, because they couldn't really amplify the recording. So all they had was one of these little trumpets, right? And how that could have reached the whole audience in Carnegie Hall, I don't know, but somehow they managed. Maybe they had a very big horn. while he finally gets the first 2 volumes printed, and they come out. And again, it's just everything he does gets the most wonderful praise. They think it's the most gigantic undertaking since the making of the King James Bible, King James edition of the Bible. I mean, that's how he was written about. But nobody wanted to buy the stuff, so. Then on one of his trips, he goes back to the plains, and he wants to get the story of the Custer's Lad's stand at Little Bighorn from the native side. And what he finds out is that Custer was just a horrible strategist. He sent one of his more incompetent people out for the first encounter with the enemy. And then he basically watched them being slaughtered from a hilltop. And he was literally, according to the story, was literally about 10 minutes riding from where all this slaughter happened. And he just waited till everybody was more or less killed, and then he drove in. And then he was surprised by a new contingent of Sioux warriors who came in, and that was the end of him. But what he basically learned was that the official story was not how it had gone down. Here are some more. I'll just go through some photos of the. This is the second trip to the Sioux. Oh, dang. Yeah, there we are. Sometimes he's accused of dressing up the natives. Because they have discovered that a few portraits are taken with the same shirt. But what we have to realize is that a lot of these people were basically already destroyed, and so not all of them still had their original ceremonial dress. So here and there, he kind of provided them with a war bonnet or with a shirt, but overall, most of it was their own wardrobe. Here, this is probably one that he would have had shot with his big camera. It's just amazing how much of the atmosphere he captured in these images. It's, I mean, in a lot of them you see that they're not. It's not like it used to be, but they still have all this grandeur in them, right? Here's a war party. I've noticed that a lot of the photos of the warriors he takes from a really low angle. This angle is not that low, but a lot of them he takes from where they are on a hill, and he will be a little bit lower on the hill and kind of look up at them. And so he must have. That must have been a very conscious decision. Gathering woods. A lot of the Plains tribes would hunt for 6 months and gather enough food, and then go to their winter camp, and where it was too cold to do much hunting. By the way, when the Plains tribes were at their most, in their best shape, so to speak, they think there were about 60 million buffalo. And you still had the passenger pigeon, which when they flew over, these flocks were so big that the sky would darken for hours at a time. And of course, the buffalo were systematically shot just so that the natives would be brought to their knees. Now, there is another interesting theory that those buffalo herds were not always this big. So before most of the native population, one of the estimates is about 90% of them, died from European diseases. Because there were many more of them, the buffalo and those damn passenger pigeons were also hunted much more intensively. So the thought is that once so many of them had died out, that these wild animal populations all of a sudden exploded. So it may not have been the pristine natural state that there were that many animals on the plains. Here's an interesting picture. This is two chiefs in a teepee, inside a teepee. And what you can see in between them is a clock. It looks like an alarm clock or something. And this was not what Curtis had in mind, because he wanted to show them in their original state. So it was actually photoshopped. Well, they didn't have Photoshop, but the equivalent of photoshopped out. And here's the one without the clock, but it's the same picture. Some more. This is a scene from when he was at Little Bighorn. So this is the river where the Sioux were camping, and where they were surprised by the first contingents of Curtis's soldiers, but I think the chief was even taking a bath, but anyhow, he ran to his horse and went on the attack with his warriors, and the rest is history. You see, this is one where he kind of is a little bit lower. Now, all those war bonnets, he wasn't traveling with all those war bonnets, so we know that he didn't provide every Native American with their outfit. Another. He has a lot of images of elders of the tribe, and this is the last of that. By the way, I will provide links. You can find all the 20 volumes have been digitized and they're online, so you can find all of those. He still, even though this multimedia show was such a giant hit, he didn't make a penny, and so he thought, okay, the next thing, movies were now the big thing. We were in where are we? Let's see. 14, I think. 19. Yeah, around 1913, 1914. He's bankrupt, $50,000 in debt, $50,000, $1,900, right? So he's in bad shape, and he now has all his hopes set on this Hollywood phenomenon, the movie. And he has great plans to do the first movie with all native actors. So this was before Nanook of the North. And he decides to do this with the Kwakiutl, which is a tribe, I think, near Vancouver Island. And all the northern tribes that were living along the coast were pretty wealthy. It's also the area where there was most of a hierarchy. Something that has interested me for a long time is that the hierarchical structure is really something you encounter later on in the cultural evolution. And I've always thought that in this day and age where we're living now, there's really not that much need for a hierarchical structure anymore. It's not like for instance, when Bismarck set up the Germany as an administrative masterwork. You really needed all these people, and you needed to have all these countries tied together in one entity, because you had to keep track of everything, and the only way you could do it was this paperwork and with administrators. And now you don't really need it anymore. So I've always thought that it was kind of natural that a lot of countries are kind of falling apart. Scotland wants to become independent. The Basques want to become independent. Even in Holland, the Frisians, just this tiny little area in the north of Holland, they have their own language and they want to be independent. So all these 19th century constructs of the nation state are kind of superficial, or becoming superficial now. And I think that one of the dynamics we are living through in this day and age is that in our own life, we can get along without all this hierarchical structuring, but for a lot of people, it's really important, because otherwise they'll lose their reason for being. So, for instance, for a religion, you need to have a structure, so I think one of the dynamics is that we're still hunter-gatherers, basically, and whatever came afterwards, so the Neolithic and the Industrial Age, it was pretty much a straitjacket. Jamestown, the first British settlement in the United States, they couldn't keep the people in place. They all wanted to move over to the Indians because they had such a much better life. They were healthier, they were taller, they were happier. So we weren't really all that we thought we were. And so I think a lot of what we are encountering now is this kind of struggle between the hierarchical, the organized religion, and our daily life, where well, you don't even need a book anymore. You go online and you find what you need to find, right? So, let's see. Now we are. Oh, so he makes this movie, and I'll just show you a few. Let's see. I go here, and then I go here. No.
Other direction.
Other direction. Okay. Yeah, okay. Now this is a bit complicated the way I want to do that. I just want to show you a few sections because I have some anecdotal material to talk about. This movie was rediscovered, I think, in the 50s. And in one of the first showings, because this was nitrate, it caught fire and was almost destroyed. So what we are seeing here is something that was kind of slapped together from what was left of the movie, and there are huge inconsistencies in the story. You see them canoeing and going after seals, and then all of a sudden they're standing on a whale. So I'm sure that there were some scenes in between. All right. Yeah, I'm sure this was a little bit better than what it is now. These were the Kwakiutl, and they weren't living in native costumes anymore. So he had to kind of bribe the people who were going to participate in the movie to put on their old get-ups, and a lot of the ceremonies that they had, so especially in this area, they had the potlatch, right? That was forbidden because you, as a wealthy Kwakiutl, you demonstrated your wealth not by what you had, but by what you could give away. So they had all these big giving ceremonies. And this is, he put together some kind of a love story, different tribes, and I'm not going to get into that now, but this is so difficult here. Yeah, I want to scrub. There we go. So here we get to the island where they're going to hunt seals. Now there's an interesting little story. Curtis had himself dropped off with two of his assistants to start shooting here because they wanted to have a lot of seal footage. And the boat left, so the three of them were left on this island. And he had seen on a map that it was about 13 foot high or so. So he thought they were in good shape. But then he realized all of a sudden that because this is all around Vancouver Island, and so you have these enormous tides that go up much higher than 13 feet. So he realized they were in big trouble, and they were going to stay there for the night. So the water keeps rising and rising and rising, and at the end, they are up to their waist in water, holding up the camera equipment, and then they're finally rescued by a boat, but that was a close call. Oh, here's a whale. Now, they weren't, in these days, they weren't whaling anymore, so they actually had to buy well, according to one story, they bought it, according to the other, they rented it. They rented a whale for the movie, a movie whale, and when they were done, of course, the tribe didn't want this thing rotting on their coast, so they brought it back to the factory where they were taking it apart. Now, there's some great footage of the war canoes. So his bride gets kidnapped by an evil tribe of evil medicine men. Dang, this is difficult. Yeah. So then they go capture the bride. Oh, these are the headhunters. So I think it looks like they just had some hair. You see when they're holding up stuff? Well, it will come. Those are supposedly heads that they hunted. This is a nice scene coming up. And again, this was staged. Yeah. So Curtis was standing on the beach, telling them to go faster and faster and faster, and they ended up hitting a rock or something, and everybody fell out of the boat, and they had to do it all over again. Yeah, I like this one with the totem costumes. Now I'm wondering, there's a lot of gesturing in silent movies, and it's always the same. It's like a lot of waving and stuff. So that must have been just kind of the thing you do in a movie in those early days. And there's a lot of that in this one too. Let's see. Yeah, this is pretty nice. Now this would have been so wonderful in color because everything is these super bright colors. Well, if you've ever flown to Vancouver, the airport there, you see a lot of that stuff in the airport even. Yeah, well, okay, so that's the movie. Now I go this way. Yeah, I go back here. The movie again was a big hit for as long as it lasted, because then they got in a dispute with the distributor. It also sounds so 20th century. I mean, one of the few movies that I was involved with as a producer also finally disappeared because of a dispute with a distributor. And he lost possession of the movie, and it disappeared, and it took until 1952 to find it back. But for the short time that it was being shown, it was again a big hit. But he had invested so much money in it that he still ended up with a huge loss. And more in debt, of course. Then by 1916, his long-suffering wife files for divorce, and Curtis moves into the Rainier Club, and that's where I, after 2 attempts, I got access to the. It's a club, so you can't just walk in. I got an introduction, and I got to see all the Curtis prints they have, because he got room and board there for, I think, a number of years, and he paid for that by providing them with photos. So this is a large building. It's kind of almost half a city block, 4 stories high, and every wall has Curtis prints on it. Original Curtis prints. The money now totally dries up. J.P. Morgan has died. His son is not very interested in providing money for what's left for Curtis to do. Curtis finally moves to Hollywood, where he opens a photo shop and works for Cecil B. DeMille as a set photographer, and he also does some second unit camera work. And his eldest daughter, who was running the photo business in Seattle, when Curtis's wife gets the Photoshop in the when they divide up the property, she also gets all the negative. And amazingly, even though Curtis was hardly ever home, his kids love him. And so they take his side, and Beth destroys all the glass plate negatives that are still in the store. So that's all gone. Beth also moves to Hollywood. I think she moves first, and then he comes after her. She marries another photographer. They start their own photo shop, and Curtis gets enough money together to go on another trip. This time through California, and that's none of the books are in order of his trips. So, and the California tribes are pretty much gone by this time, because they've all been killed off, more so than in most other states. So there are only very few left. A few around Palm Springs. There's still a tribe there, right? So this is Palm Canyon. I think you can still go up Palm Canyon with a Native American guide. And this is Lake Walker in Nevada. He has a lot of shots of natives fishing with a kind of a spear. And it makes for a nice scene, because you get the mirror effect, right, of the mountains and the person standing there. So in the meantime, he through the years he keeps publishing new books of all the photos he's already taken. So by this time he is already at volume 12, 14, 15, 16. Yeah, he's already at volume 17, and he finally, his daughter, they must have been doing pretty well in their Photoshop, because his daughter now finances his last trip to Alaska, and he wants to go to Nunavak Island because he's heard that there haven't been no missionaries, there have been no government people, so there he hopes to find people who are still the way they were. And that turns out to be the case. And he has some wonderful photos from here. And this time he doesn't have to ask them to put on a costume, because this is just the way they still live. This is one of the villages. So again, on this island also, they need to go from village to village. These kayaks are just, it's amazing how this is really form follows function. What is the expression again? Form follows function. Yeah. There's not that much wood in Alaska, right? So they have to put this thing together with a minimum amount of driftwood, and then it's seal skins. They're super lightweight. The form is just beautiful, and I actually had a chance to kayak in one in the weirdest place in Curacao in the Caribbean. Somebody had bought a real sealskin kayak in Alaska and taken it with them to Curacao. And of course, the thing just smelled so bad, because these sealskins in the tropics, it's just rotting away, right? So it was a great experience to be rowing in it and to feel how responsive it was. I was about 10 or 12 or so, but it was just unbearable, the smell of it. And I think they had different kayaks for different purposes, so depending on what they were hunting, because I've seen bigger ones for like beluga whale hunting and stuff like that. Now here, it's true. I mean, it's in his biography. It's described as here he finally met people in their element, and yeah, you can see that on the faces. I mean, these are happy, whole people, right? This is on another island, I think King Island, King something. Here's a whole group. Yeah, here's one of the bigger boats, see? So that's probably what they went whale hunting in. And here's a smaller one. This was for muskrats, I think, hunting muskrats. The natives in Siberia are very much into mushrooms, the fly agaric, and the chief and the families who are in charge get to. Apparently, there's not that many of them, so they get to eat them first, and then the rest of the tribe catches their urine, and they drink that because apparently it keeps working. So you don't have to eat the mushrooms. You can also drink the urine, somebody else's urine. And here, Carel, and finally some kids in a kayak. And yeah, now depending on how much time there is and how much interest there is, I want to kind of go through a bunch of photos just because they're wonderful, but we don't have to do that. We can also start to kind of talk about it. So whatever you want, whatever. I'll just race through a few. This is the Pima. So that's in Arizona and New Mexico, I guess. The Pima are still with us, but they have a very high incidence of type 2 diabetes, and they weren't just because all these tribes were kind of shoved to a corner somewhere, so they didn't have that much chance of doing their normal agriculture or hunter and gathering. So they were dependent on government rations, and they were all just white flour and some lard, right? That was a government ration. So then in the 70s or 80s, there was this, I think he was a botanist, Gary Nepham. He got the idea of trying to see what would happen if they would go back to their original diet of desert foods, and so the fruit of a cactus, and then they have these pods, the mesquite pods, and things like that. And lo and behold, they became healthy again. So now he's trying to provide enough seed and land so that they can start growing healthier food again. This must be from one of those cactuses. You see, he was just a fantastic portrait photographer. This is not a beautiful one. He, in some of them, there's also a link that I'll give you where you can really zoom in. It's on a Smithsonian page. And then on some of the images, you can see how it's has been retouched with like 1-2 hair brushes to kind of give some more structure to something that was just too bland. That's it for the Pima. The Hopi. The Hopi, he really, I think he loved them more than any of the other tribes, so he kept coming back, and eventually he got initiated in the Snake tribe, and he got to do practically the whole ceremony. He bailed out part of it because he was afraid that the government would get on their case if they would involve a white guy. So, but this is the one we saw as a slide, right? The girls. So this is unmarried women are wearing this hairstyle. The girls, when he came to the village, they weren't always dressed that way, but again, he wanted a nice photo, so he made them all dress up. And I'm sure that he placed the pottery in certain locations to get a better picture. Why is this? Oh, yeah. And here, this is also, I'm sure this is also staged, right? But they like doing it, so. This one is, she's making like one of these very thin flatbreads, and he is working with some clay. So it looks almost the same, but it's a very different substance. Here's the snake chief again, another one. Great shot. Lots of shots where he shoots them from the back. I mean, just in general, all the tribes. And I think it's to give the impression that they're vanishing. Yeah, that's it. So yeah, that's about it, I think.
Carel,
I can show more, but whatever.
I just wanted to say probably like many in this room, I had a day I was rushing all day long. And this has been such a treat to just slow down and come back to this world that you recreated for us. It was very transportive. I just want to thank you very much.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah. I was really, I'm not a good public speaker, but I was really so moved by the story of his life, how somebody just decides at the peak of his I mean, he had a great family. Everything was going great for him, right? And he just decides to just go for it and dedicate his life to this. And what you will see in the documentary, to which I'm going to give you a link, is how incredibly important these 20 volumes now are for the Native American tribes, because in many instances, what he wrote down, he always had a stenographer. He would build lexicons, so like primitive dictionaries, I guess. Is that what? Yeah, yeah. And then he had all these recordings of the songs. So in many cases, he took a lot of photos of the Sundance. His photos and his recordings and everything else that he did was the main documentation for the people who live now and who want to reconstruct those ceremonies. He was also one of the first people to defend, and he did it in writing too, advocate for the use of peyote, for the peyote cults in the South. And now it's officially the Native American Church, right, that can use peyote, and it's moved all the way up to Canada. So it's now a phenomenon that spread way outside of the range of the peyote cactus. My stepdaughter, I mean, I always refer to her as my daughter, but biologically she's my stepdaughter. She's Navajo, and she is, at the moment, she's a doctor on the White River Apache Reservation, where Curtis had some of his adventures. I've also spoken to a number of her relatives and realized through them how important Curtis's work still is for Native Americans. Yeah. Yeah.
May I ask you a photography question?
Yeah.
As an absolute novice / amateur. His portraiture indoors is so dark, but yet I see so much detail.
Yeah.
How is he achieving that?
Well, I think because I've been wondering about that too. Just how did he get enough light? And obviously, practically every portrait, he is in control of the lighting. I mean, he decides from what angle the light is going to come, how much of it. A lot of stuff I think he had to kind of accentuate with his little brushes, just to kind of loosen the foreground from the background, right? And in many cases, he apparently just wanted it to be that dark. So, for instance, the Canyon de Chelly, right? Or the Vanishing Tribe, which I started with, that was really on purpose. But it was one of the original reasons that I went to the Rainier Club, because I wanted to make sure that what I was seeing, that was really what he had in mind. He used only photogravures, which is a much more involved process, because you don't have your negative. Those were all glass plate negatives, right? You don't have that and then print it onto paper. It's printed onto a copper plate, and then it's a whole etching process. And that's used to print. And especially in those days when the paper wasn't as good as it is now, you could get much more of a tonal. So you got more midtones.
The darkness of the portraiture also speaks to me as a vanishing subject, which I find profound. But I see so much detail in this man's costume.
Yeah, well, I'm sure that in a lot of cases he just did it outside with a black backdrop.
Right.
Because the filmmaker who did Nanook of the North, he actually visited Curtis to get some pointers from him. And one of the things Curtis told him was, yeah, you're never going to be able to shoot anything in an igloo. So what you do is you have to build a half igloo, and then you have your camera there.
Wow, he was in set design.
Yeah. It was. Yeah, I mean, they were doing that stuff way in the beginning. It's pretty amazing, yeah.
Beautiful.
But I've been wondering about the how beautifully lit all his portraits are, and how he did it with probably just natural light. I mean, he didn't have anything else, right? So.
Looking at his work now, I feel I know less about photography.
Yeah.
It's so magic. I don't know how he achieved that.
Yeah. Anything else? Anybody else?
Actually,
Yeah.
sorry, go ahead. You were how he initiated contact with the tribes. Is there any kind of?
Yeah, he the first time that he went on a real expedition was with Grinnell, so the guy from the Audubon Society, and Grinnell had been living with the Plains Indians for many years, or had been visiting them many years. So that was his first introduction, and many times he just goes for it, and sometimes it gets a little bit hairy. On one excursion, he takes his family along because, of course, his wife has been complaining a lot that she never sees him. And so he takes everybody along, and they go into Canyon du Chet. Did I show a picture of Canyon du Chet? Should be here. Yeah, this one. Yeah. They go into Canyon du Chet, and if I had Wi-Fi, I could show you my own panorama of Canyon du Chet, but anyhow, this one is better, so better photo. And they camp out there, and somebody, the kind of the go-between, wakes them up in the middle of the night and said, "We have to go right now." Because apparently a woman is giving birth and it's not going well, and the Navajo are starting to say that the white people are causing trouble, so they have to flee in the middle of the night, and his wife never wants to be on one of those trips again. So, yeah, this is Cañón del Muerto. Yeah, another spectacular photo. Yeah. So yeah, sometimes he. Oh, and then for the Plains Indians, he had one very important Native American who should certainly be mentioned. He had been abducted to one of these boarding schools and came back to the tribe and became kind of a go-between, right? And his name, dang. Well, anyhow, he was an important person for Curtis, because a lot of, especially the Plains Indians, they were not very friendly. So you really needed some help there. And one of the older warriors, while Curtis was taking a photo of one of the teepees, this guy comes galloping towards him, ready to run right over him and his camera. And just at the last moment, the chief of the gathering comes in from the side and kind of pushes the other guy away. But yeah, he had some close encounters, I'm sure. The medicine man, or the Apache guy who shows the sacred objects, becomes so remorseful afterwards that he's dead within a year, and maybe he died just of grief, or maybe he was killed. I don't know, but it was still, it was not totally safe to make those trips. Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit? I remember you mentioning it. Well, actually, throughout the talk, you're saying how he was there was a lot of urgency to try and capture this before these tribes disappeared.
Yeah.
How soon after he took these photographs were some of these tribes gone?
Well, he was. I mean, there were two things going on. One is that the population in general was going down. So in the early 1900s, it was 230,000. So they were literally dying off. But the other thing was that because of all this government interference, because of the boarding schools, the missionaries, a lot of stuff got destroyed. I mean, they were Nunavak, that island where he was, a few years afterwards, some very strict Christian missionary came to the island, and they destroyed all the ceremonial masks. It was gone. So a lot of that was going on all over the place, and I'm sure he was very aware of that. He had personally witnessed how the daughter of the chief of the Puget Sound was living in a hovel on the beach, and in what horrible shape most of the people were up and down the coast. So I think it was pretty obvious that it was just on its way out. And that's the way they were talking about it also. I mean, that's the way the white people were talking about it. And they were actually actively helping it along, right? Shooting all the buffaloes so that the Plains Indians couldn't live off the buffalo anymore, which was ridiculous on its own because large parts of the prairie are not really suited to agriculture. So these kids were hauled off to boarding schools to teach them proper jobs, to become farmers and things like that. But those areas you couldn't really farm, and even when people settled and farmed there, it could sustain just a few people, while before that, when the natives were still living there, it could sustain 10, 15 times more people. So not only was it ridiculous to force these people to do this, they were wrong altogether, because it was just not a very efficient way of using the land, that particular land, right? So yeah, that was another thing that was going on in the same time. Yeah. Was that the question? Or? Yeah.
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 Does anyone else have a question? Or let Carol drift off?
No. No. All right.
Well,
Thank you.
This was wonderful.
Okay.